Welcome to the world of daily life stories. Don't forget to like and subscribe so you don't miss new stories. Enjoy listening. The unexpected trouble at the airport. It was a bright morning at the airport, and the air was filled with the usual buzz of travelers hurrying to catch their flights. But on this particular day, something was about to happen that would change everything for a young woman named Zara. Zara was a woman of grace, confidence, and an aura of quiet power. She stood tall with her head held high, dressed elegantly in a stylish black dress that perfectly matched her strong, yet gentle personality. Her dark, wavy hair was pulled back into a neat bun, and her sunglasses concealed her thoughtful eyes as she walked towards the private jet terminal. The soft click of her heels echoed through the quiet hallway, but Zara didn't seem to notice. She was used to being the center of attention wherever she went. What most people didn't know about Zara was that she wasn't just any ordinary woman. She came from one of the most respected royal families in the world, though she kept this fact hidden from the public eye. She was a private person, and despite her royal lineage, she preferred to live like anyone else. Zara had spent most of her life traveling the world on her own terms, and her wealth and status never seemed to get in the way of her grounded nature. Today, Zara was about to board her private jet to take her on a short trip for an important meeting. She had everything planned out. The staff was waiting, the jet was ready, and the luxury treatment she was used to was just a few steps away. Or so she thought. As Zara approached the entrance to her jet, she was stopped by one of the cabin crew members. "Excuse me, miss," the woman said politely but firmly. "I'm afraid you cannot board without showing proper identification." Zara paused, confused by the interruption. She knew she didn't need to show any ID, her name was already on the list, and everyone knew her as a regular client of this private airline. However, the woman's insistence was unusual. "I'm sorry, but I've been flying with this airline for years," Zara replied with a calm smile, her voice steady. "There must be some mistake." The crew member, a middle-aged woman with short blonde hair, looked at her with uncertainty. "I'm afraid I'm following the rules, miss. Without your ID, I can't allow you to board." Zara felt a strange unease bubbling inside her. She tried to stay calm, but something about this situation didn't feel right. She glanced over at the other members of the crew, who stood by silently, watching the scene unfold. "Let me speak with your supervisor," Zara requested, her voice still composed, but with a hint of firmness now. The crew member hesitated for a moment, but then turned and walked off to find someone in charge. Zara stood in place, feeling the eyes of other passengers and airport staff on her. She had been stopped countless times before, but never in this way. It was as if they didn't recognize her, as though they didn't know who she really was. Within minutes, a tall man in a suit appeared. He introduced himself as the head of the airline's ground services and asked Zara if she had a problem with the crew member's request. Zara explained the situation calmly, mentioning that she had never had to show identification before, as her name was on the flight list. The man, whose name was Mr. Williams, looked at Zara with a puzzled expression. He glanced over at the crew member and then back at her. "Miss," he said slowly, "I understand your frustration, but our rules are strict. All passengers must show identification to board. It's policy, and I'm afraid we have to follow it." Zara's patience began to wear thin, but she remained composed. She couldn't understand why they were treating her this way. Was it because of her appearance? Was it because she was a woman of color? She had flown countless times without this kind of treatment, but today was different. "I'm telling you," Zara said, her voice rising slightly. "I'm the one who booked this flight. My name is on the list. You can call anyone in the office if you don't believe me." Mr. Williams' expression shifted. He had no idea who Zara really was, but his tone grew more sympathetic as he realized this was becoming an uncomfortable situation. "Let me make a call," he said, stepping away to use his phone. Zara stood still, feeling the tension building around her. It wasn't until a few minutes later that Mr. Williams returned, his face pale and his eyes wide with shock. He stood before Zara, speechless for a moment, as if he had just been handed a difficult truth. I am so sorry, Miss Zara," Mr. Williams stammered. I had no idea it was you. Zara raised an eyebrow, still not fully understanding. What do you mean? Miss Zara, Mr. Williams repeated, you're a member of the royal family, aren't you? The crew member who had stopped her looked equally stunned. She had clearly not recognized Zara, or perhaps she had underestimated her importance. The realization hit the staff like a wave, and suddenly, they were scrambling to apologize for their mistake. But it was too late. Zara's calm exterior began to crack. She was angry now, not just for the disrespect she had faced, but for the realization that she had been judged based on her appearance, and not by the person she truly was. Before Zara could say anything, the flight staff began to apologize profusely, and Zara's patience had finally run out. She was about to board her private jet, but the experience had already left a bitter taste in her mouth. As she stepped into the jet, she turned back one last time to see the crew still standing there, looking ashamed and embarrassed. It was clear they had made a grave mistake. But what happened next would be even more surprising for them. Zara's phone rang as she settled into her seat. It was her family lawyer, and the news was even more shocking. The airline, after learning her true identity, had already decided to take action. The crew members who had failed to recognize Zara were about to lose their jobs. The airline had no choice but to let them go. This was only the beginning of what would turn into a very public scandal. But for Zara, it was a reminder that appearances could be deceiving, and no one, no matter who they were, was immune from being judged unfairly. Her journey had just begun, and this was only the first chapter of a much larger story. The backlash that followed. The hum of the private jet's engines was a familiar sound to Zara. As the jet ascended into the sky, leaving the crowded airport behind, she gazed out of the window, her mind racing. The smooth takeoff should have brought her peace, but the events of the morning left a bitter taste in her mouth. She couldn't shake the feeling of humiliation that had washed over her when the staff at the airport had failed to recognize her. Zara had always known that people judged others based on appearances. But today, the stark reality of how society often viewed her, based solely on her race and gender, had hit her harder than ever before. It wasn't just a minor inconvenience. It was a blatant reminder that, in some people's eyes, she was never going to be seen for who she truly was. Her phone buzzed in her hand, snapping her out of her thoughts. It was a message from her lawyer, confirming the news. The cabin crew members involved in the incident had been fired. They would face a legal settlement, and the airline was already preparing a public statement of apology. For a moment, Zara felt a sense of relief. The crew members had made a grave mistake. But at the same time, part of her wondered whether this swift action was enough to change anything. Was it just a corporate response to save face? Or would this incident spark real change? Zara had a deep belief in the power of personal integrity, and she wasn't sure whether this situation would have any lasting impact beyond the headlines. As the flight continued, Zara sat back, her thoughts turning inward. She thought about her royal heritage, her family's legacy, and the hidden challenges she faced in a world that often ignored her for who she was. Zara's family had always taught her to be humble, to stay grounded, and to never flaunt her wealth or status. They had instilled in her the importance of kindness, compassion, and respect for others. But as Zara grew older, she learned how easily people could take advantage of her quiet nature. She had often been overlooked in rooms full of powerful people simply because they assumed she wasn't important enough. And this wasn't just in the business world, she had experienced it in social settings too. At first, she hadn't let it bother her. She preferred to remain behind the scenes, handling matters quietly and gracefully. But after today, Zara realized how fragile her peace really was. Hours later, as Zara landed in her destination city, she was met with a flurry of media attention. News of the airport incident had already spread like wildfire. There were photos of Zara standing outside the private jet terminal, her face calm but clearly frustrated. Some of the news outlets focused on the firing of the cabin crew, while others were more concerned with Zara's royal connections. Many didn't know her true identity, but now that the story was making waves, they were eager to learn more. The headlines were everywhere, Black woman denied access to private jet, airline apologizes after revealing her royal status. Some reports spun the story as a racial incident, while others focused on the fact that the staff had no idea who they were dealing with. The media frenzy was overwhelming. Zara hadn't anticipated this kind of attention. Her lawyer had advised her to stay out of the public eye for the time being, to allow the storm to pass. But as she read the articles, something stirred inside her. The public reaction was a mixture of sympathy, outrage, and curiosity, but it was clear that most people were more focused on the scandalous nature of the story than the real issue at hand. The issue wasn't about a royal woman being denied access to her jet, it was about the assumption that someone like Zara didn't belong, that she couldn't possibly be someone of importance. It was about the subtle racism and biases that lingered in society, often unnoticed by those who weren't directly affected. The following days were a blur. Zara's lawyer handled most of the press inquiries, but she still couldn't escape the constant stream of calls, messages, and media attention. The incident at the airport had turned her into a symbol, whether she liked it or not, of something much larger. She was suddenly being looked at through the lens of both admiration and scrutiny. In the days that followed, Zara decided to speak out. She wasn't interested in the drama of the incident, but she saw an opportunity to address a bigger issue, something that had been simmering beneath the surface for a long time. She could feel the weight of her position and the responsibility that came with it. For the first time in a long while, she felt compelled to share her voice with the world. She called a press conference, determined to take control of the narrative. The conference was scheduled in a sleek conference room in one of the most luxurious hotels in the city. The media was gathered, the cameras were rolling, and Zara stepped into the room, her posture confident and unyielding. The eyes of the world were on her. As the questions began, Zara could feel the tension in the room. Reporters were eager to hear her thoughts on the incident, to hear how she felt about the actions of the cabin crew, and, of course, to learn more about her royal connections. But Zara wasn't interested in answering those questions. She had something far more important to say. The issue here, she began, her voice calm but firm, isn't about one woman being denied access to her private jet. It's about how we, as a society, often make assumptions about people based on the way they look. It's about how many of us are dismissed, ignored, or undervalued because of the color of our skin, our gender, or our appearance. It's about the subtle biases that we carry, sometimes without even realizing it. Zara's words hit the room like a wave. The reporters were silent, listening intently. She continued, her voice gaining strength with every word. "I want to make it clear that this isn't just about me," she said. "This is about every person who has ever been underestimated, misjudged, or treated unfairly because of who they are. I am not the only one who has faced this. Many of us have been treated as invisible, as though we don't belong, as though our worth is defined by our appearance or our social status." The room was quiet for a moment, and Zara could see the shift in the room. The journalists were no longer asking about her royal background or the drama surrounding the incident. They were listening, truly listening, to what she had to say. "I hope this incident will serve as a reminder that we all have a role to play in changing the way we view each other," Zara concluded. "It's not enough to just apologize when something goes wrong. We need to challenge the biases that exist within our society and make sure everyone, no matter their background, has an equal chance to succeed, to be seen, and to be respected." The press conference ended with a round of applause, and for the first time in days, Zara felt a sense of calm wash over her. The media might still be interested in the scandal, but Zara had taken back control. She had used this moment, this challenge, to speak out for something far more meaningful than herself. As she left the room, Zara knew that the journey ahead would not be easy. But she was ready. This was only the beginning of her fight, not just for herself, but for anyone who had ever been held back or silenced by prejudice. The ripple effect. The media frenzy that had followed Zara's press conference was unprecedented. In the days that followed, her words echoed across social media platforms, news outlets, and even in living rooms around the world. What had initially started as a small story about an airline's mistake had blossomed into a much larger conversation about race, gender, and privilege. Zara wasn't used to the spotlight. Though she had spent most of her life in public spaces, her position within the royal family had always kept her somewhat shielded from the kind of attention she was now receiving. But she quickly realized that her voice, her experience, was something that many people had been waiting for. The outrage over the incident sparked conversations that transcended the walls of the airport or the private jet industry. People from all walks of life were sharing their own stories of being judged unfairly, dismissed, or undermined based on their identity. Zara's story was not an isolated one. Women of color, in particular, began to come forward with their own experiences of being treated with less respect or assumed to be of lesser importance. Zara's decision to speak up had opened a floodgate of emotion and frustration that had long been bottled up. As the conversation expanded, Zara felt a sense of responsibility growing within her. She could no longer remain in the background, a silent observer of injustice. The incident at the airport, though painful, had been the catalyst for something far bigger than she had anticipated. It was clear now that her story was just one piece of a much larger puzzle. Zara knew that if she was to make any real impact, she would need to channel the public's anger into something constructive. The media, while eager to sensationalize her story, was also eager to focus on the what's next. And for Zara, the next step was clear: change. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of interviews and meetings, Zara sat alone in her hotel suite, looking out over the city's skyline. The weight of the past few days had taken its toll. Though she had been praised for her courage, Zara couldn't shake the feeling that the conversation was moving faster than she could keep up with. The pressure to be the voice for so many people, to be the face of this growing movement, was both an honor and a burden. As she sat there in silence, Zara thought about the people who had supported her through the ordeal, her family, her lawyer, and even her closest friends who had encouraged her to stand her ground. But there was one person, in particular, who kept coming to mind. It was her grandmother, a woman who had lived through her own battles with racial injustice and had always taught Zara the value of standing tall in the face of adversity. Zara picked up her phone and dialed her grandmother's number. It was late, but Zara knew that her grandmother would be awake, always with wisdom to share, always ready to offer comfort in moments like these. "Hello, my dear," came the warm, familiar voice on the other end. "Grandma," Zara began, "I've been thinking a lot lately about everything that's happened. The press, the firing of the crew, the backlash. I don't know if I'm doing enough. If I'm making a real difference." There was a long pause, before her grandmother spoke again. "Zara, let me tell you something. You've already done more than you realize. What you did wasn't about fighting for yourself, it was about fighting for every person who has ever been overlooked, ignored, or dismissed simply because of who they are. You've taken something painful and turned it into something powerful. And that is the beginning of change." Zara closed her eyes, taking in her grandmother's words. She had heard them 1,000 times before, but they never failed to ground her, to remind her of why she had the strength to keep going. "Change doesn't happen overnight," her grandmother continued. "You're right to feel the weight of what you've started. But don't let that pressure break you. Let it fuel you. Keep using your voice. Keep pushing for the change that you know is necessary." Zara smiled faintly, feeling a warmth spread through her. "Thank you, Grandma. I don't know what I would do without you. You'll figure it out, my dear. You always do." As Zara hung up the phone, a sense of clarity settled over her. She had been so focused on the chaos of the moment that she had forgotten why she had started this journey in the first place. It wasn't about proving a point to the world. It was about standing up for the people who had been silenced for too long. It was about building something bigger than herself. The next few days brought a whirlwind of activity. Zara's team worked tirelessly to put together a plan for how she could make the most of the platform she had been given. Zara had been approached by multiple organizations, some seeking her endorsement, others inviting her to speak at conferences and rallies. But Zara was focused on something far more personal. She had already started working with a group of activists and advocates who were dedicated to pushing for systemic change within the airline industry. The idea was to create a foundation that would raise awareness about issues of racial discrimination and biases in air travel and beyond. She wanted to ensure that no one else would face the same kind of mistreatment she had experienced. This was bigger than just her, it was about leveling the playing field for everyone. But Zara knew that the road ahead would not be without challenges. Not everyone was supportive of her efforts. Some critics accused her of using the incident for personal gain, while others dismissed her as a symbol rather than a force for real change. There were even those who tried to minimize the issue, claiming that the actions of the airline staff were simply an isolated incident, not a reflection of the larger societal problems Zara had spoken about. In response, Zara doubled down on her message. She didn't let the negativity consume her. Instead, she used it as fuel to push forward with her mission. She didn't need to convince everyone, she just needed to keep doing the right thing, even when it was hard. Months passed, and Zara's foundation began to take shape. She partnered with key organizations, organized events to raise awareness, and used her platform to advocate for diversity, inclusion, and equal treatment. But more than that, Zara became a symbol of resilience and hope. Her story had inspired so many, and she had become a leader in the fight for racial equality. And though she had come a long way since the day she was stopped at the airport, Zara knew that this was just the beginning. The journey was far from over. There were still battles to be fought, voices to be heard, and injustices to be corrected. But one thing was certain, Zara would continue to fight. Not just for herself, but for all those who had been silenced, overlooked, or mistreated. The ripple effect of her words had only just begun, and Zara was ready to lead the charge toward a better, more inclusive future. The unexpected support. As Zara's foundation grew, so did the intensity of the movement she had inadvertently started. The conversations around racial inequality, discrimination, and privilege began to take center stage, not only in the media but also in the business world, where companies started to examine their own policies and practices. But despite the swelling wave of support, Zara's journey was not without its hurdles. She quickly realized that change, no matter how necessary, was never easy. The backlash continued from those who felt threatened by the new discourse on inequality. There were people who still tried to downplay the significance of her experience, labeling her as an activist or even worse, troublemaker. Zara had been prepared for criticism. It came with the territory, after all. But what surprised her were the moments of unexpected support, the voices that spoke up in her defense when she needed it most. One afternoon, Zara received a message from a renowned businesswoman she had never met before, Maya Clark, the CEO of a multinational corporation known for its philanthropic efforts. The message was simple, but its impact was profound. Zara, your courage is inspiring. I want to offer my support. Let's discuss how we can work together to amplify your foundation's work. The conversation you've started is too important to let die. Zara was taken aback. Maya Clark was a powerful figure, a woman whose name was respected in circles Zara had yet to navigate. But here was a businesswoman who saw the same values Zara believed in and was willing to invest time, resources, and her own influence into pushing forward the cause of equality. They set up a meeting, and when the two women sat down together in a conference room later that week, Zara immediately felt a sense of relief. Maya wasn't just another corporate leader who saw Zara's situation as an opportunity for publicity, Maya was genuine. She listened intently as Zara shared her vision for the foundation, her desire to not only raise awareness but also create tangible change within industries that had long been resistant to diversity and inclusion. Zara, Maya said, I know firsthand how difficult it can be to shift the culture of an organization. It's more than just a matter of policy. It's about changing the way people think, how they view power and privilege. But I've seen it happen before, and I believe we can make it happen again. Maya's words gave Zara a renewed sense of purpose. With her new ally by her side, Zara realized that she wasn't alone in this fight. Together, they could do more than just raise awareness, they could create a blueprint for real systemic change. As they discussed their next steps, they identified key sectors where Zara's foundation could make an immediate impact. They decided to focus on industries like aviation, hospitality, and fashion, where issues of discrimination were particularly prevalent. But they also saw an opportunity to push for change in schools and universities, advocating for more inclusive curricula and teaching practices that would challenge stereotypes and promote empathy. Maya's commitment to the cause wasn't just about words. She threw her full weight behind Zara's mission, even offering to have her company sponsor a large-scale event to raise awareness about racial bias in business practices. It was a game-changer. The event, which was later dubbed Voices of Change, a conversation on equality and empowerment, became one of the most high-profile conferences of its kind, drawing attendees from all over the world, business leaders, politicians, activists, and educators, all eager to hear Zara's story and discuss how to dismantle the systems that perpetuated inequality. Zara spoke at the event, not as a royal figure or someone with special status, but as a woman who had experienced firsthand the impact of racial bias and was now determined to change the narrative. She was joined on stage by Maya Clark, who shared her own journey of overcoming obstacles in the corporate world as a woman of color. Their combined presence at the event sent a powerful message: two women, from different worlds, united by a shared vision for justice and equality. The event was a turning point in Zara's journey. The discussions were candid, raw, and heartfelt. There were moments of discomfort, yes, but there was also an overwhelming sense of hope. Attendees were no longer just hearing about the issue, they were actively engaged in finding solutions. Zara's message was clear: the fight for equality couldn't wait any longer. It was time to take action. In the months that followed, Zara's foundation gained traction in ways she hadn't anticipated. Corporate partnerships began to grow. People started to reach out with offers of help, advice, and financial backing. Zara had always been an advocate for humility and privacy, but she couldn't deny the power of collaboration. She had created something bigger than herself, and now, she had a network of passionate individuals and organizations supporting the cause. Yet, as the foundation's influence grew, so did the complexity of the challenges Zara faced. She became more than just an advocate, she was now seen as a leader in the fight for racial justice, a symbol of resilience for people who had been marginalized and ignored. But with that leadership came expectations Zara wasn't sure she was ready for. She found herself increasingly torn between her role as a public figure and her desire for privacy. She longed for the quiet days before the airport incident when she could travel unnoticed, just another person in the crowd. One evening, as Zara sat alone in her office, reviewing the foundation's progress, a knock on the door broke her concentration. She looked up to see her personal assistant standing in the doorway, holding a letter. "This came for you," her assistant said, handing the envelope to Zara. Zara opened it carefully, reading the words that appeared on the crisp white paper. It was a handwritten note from one of the cabin crew members who had been fired after the airport incident. "Dear Miss Zara, I wanted to apologize for the way I treated you that day. I never intended to disrespect you, and I deeply regret my actions. When I learned who you were, I was shocked. There are no excuses for what happened. But I hope you can find it in your heart to understand that I was acting out of fear and not malice. I've taken responsibility for my actions and have learned so much from this experience. I will work every day to do better. Sincerely, Emily." Zara stared at the letter for a long time, a mix of emotions swirling inside her. She had never expected an apology, let alone a heartfelt one from the very person who had been part of the incident that had shaken her life. It wasn't easy, but Zara recognized the sincerity in Emily's words. Zara picked up the phone, called her lawyer, and made a decision that would further surprise the world: she would forgive the crew member. Not out of obligation, but because she understood that change didn't always come through punishment. It came through understanding, dialogue, and a willingness to grow. And so, Zara found herself once again at a crossroads, but this time, it was a path she chose to take with grace and compassion. With the support of her allies, her foundation continued to thrive, and as more doors opened for Zara, she remained steadfast in her mission. The journey toward real change was long, but Zara knew one thing for sure: she wasn't walking it alone. the long road to healing and change. As the months passed, Zara's influence continued to grow. Her foundation was becoming a powerful force for change, advocating for diversity, equality, and inclusion across multiple industries. What had started as a personal journey to address an injustice at the airport had transformed into a larger movement, one that was beginning to touch the lives of people around the world. But despite the visible progress, Zara knew the journey was far from over. Every step forward seemed to uncover new challenges, new battles to be fought. With the rising attention came criticism, too. Some people, still unwilling to confront the systemic issues of privilege and discrimination, attacked Zara's efforts, labeling her as an activist too focused on race. Others tried to discredit her by claiming that her royal background made her too distant from the realities of everyday life. The online attacks were harsh at times, but Zara refused to be deterred. One evening, as Zara sat in the office of her foundation, reviewing feedback from a recent campaign, she found herself overwhelmed by the weight of it all. The world's problems were too big for one person to solve. Sometimes, it felt like her efforts were a drop in an ocean, too small to make a significant difference. She had been fighting for so long that the emotional toll was starting to show. There were moments of doubt when she wondered if her efforts were really enough, or if she could keep going. It was during one of these low moments that Zara received a message that would remind her of why she had started this journey in the first place. It was from a young woman named Leah, a student from a small town in the Midwest, who had been following Zara's foundation and had been deeply inspired by her story. Leah wrote, "Dear Miss Zara, I've been following your journey, and I want to say thank you. Your courage has changed my life. I'm a first-generation college student, and I never thought I'd have the strength to pursue my dreams. I've always been told that people like me, black, female, from a working-class family, would never succeed. But when I saw how you stood up for yourself and for others, I realized that maybe I don't have to accept those limits. You've shown me that my voice matters. And because of you, I'm not going to give up." Zara felt a lump form in her throat as she read Leah's message. She realized that her fight, though often difficult and exhausting, was not just for herself. It was for the Leahs of the world, the young people who had been told they weren't enough, the ones who needed someone to show them that they mattered. The weight of her responsibility, once a source of stress, now became a source of strength. Zara knew that her mission was bigger than any personal struggle. It wasn't about her alone. It was about creating a world where people, especially young people like Leah, could pursue their dreams without fear of being judged for who they were. It was about changing a system that had been broken for far too long. With renewed determination, Zara threw herself back into her work. The foundation began launching more programs aimed at supporting underrepresented students, offering scholarships, mentorships, and internships to help them break into industries where they were traditionally excluded. These initiatives quickly gained traction, and Zara's story continued to resonate with those who had been marginalized. But Zara also realized that change wasn't just about creating opportunities for others, it was about educating people to recognize and confront their own biases. She partnered with schools, universities, and corporations to launch workshops focused on diversity training and unconscious bias. The response was overwhelmingly positive, but Zara knew that real change would take time. It wasn't enough to host a few workshops or distribute a few scholarships. It required a systemic shift in the way society viewed power, privilege, and equity. While Zara worked tirelessly to address these issues at the institutional level, she also began to turn her attention to something more personal. Over time, she realized that the real strength of the movement lay not just in changing policies, but in changing hearts and minds. She had started her journey as a quiet, reserved individual, reluctant to share her full story. But now, she understood that by being open, vulnerable, and honest, she could create a much deeper connection with people. In a public speech at a national conference, Zara decided to share her story, not just the part about the airport incident, but her experiences growing up, the challenges she had faced, and the lessons she had learned along the way. She spoke of her family's history, her royal lineage, and how, despite all of her privileges, she had still experienced the sting of being judged by others. She spoke of the anger she felt when she was dismissed at the airport, but also of the forgiveness she had chosen, not as a sign of weakness, but as a source of strength. The speech resonated deeply with the audience. People from all walks of life came up to her afterward, sharing their own stories of struggle and triumph. Many admitted that they had never thought of privilege and race in the ways Zara described. It was eye-opening for them. And for Zara, it was a reminder that true change starts with empathy, with understanding, and with a willingness to listen. The ripple effects of Zara's words spread far beyond that conference. She continued to use her platform to amplify the voices of those who were often silenced. She reached out to other activists, business leaders, and lawmakers, all of whom were beginning to recognize the importance of addressing inequality at every level. The Foundation's initiatives expanded, and Zara's influence in the movement for racial justice grew. But there was still much work to be done. Zara knew that real change could not be achieved without addressing the deeply entrenched systems of power and privilege that had existed for centuries. This was not an easy task. In some circles, her work was met with resistance. But Zara had learned that change is often the product of discomfort. It is through discomfort that people are forced to confront their biases and prejudices. One evening, as Zara sat with Maya Clark, her close ally and fellow advocate for change, they talked about the future. They discussed the long road ahead, the battles still to be fought, and the people they needed to reach. Zara, Maya said, I've seen a lot of people in this world fight for change. But what you're doing, it's different. You're not just fighting for equality. You're fighting for humanity. You're making people see that their success isn't complete until everyone has a chance to succeed. Zara smiled, feeling the weight of the words settle in her chest. She wasn't just fighting for a cause anymore. She was fighting for a world where everyone, regardless of background, skin color, or gender, could stand with their heads held high, knowing that they mattered, knowing that their voice counted. As she walked away from the meeting, Zara felt a renewed sense of purpose. The challenges ahead would not be easy, but she was no longer afraid. She had learned that true strength came from vulnerability, from facing injustice head-on, and from believing in the power of change, no matter how difficult the road might be. Zara's journey was far from over. But with each step forward, she was making history, one act of courage, one voice at a time. And the world was listening. New beginnings and unforeseen challenges. Zara had become a beacon of hope, a symbol of resilience and change for people from all walks of life. Her foundation, now thriving, had already started to show measurable progress. There were more scholarships being awarded to underrepresented students, and the partnerships with companies and educational institutions were growing by the day. Zara's vision was slowly but surely becoming a reality, a world where race, gender, and class no longer defined a person's potential. But with success came new complexities. Zara had always believed in the power of personal stories to bring about change. She knew that by sharing her own experiences and struggles, she could inspire others. But the more she shared, the more she was thrust into the public eye, often in ways that felt out of her control. There were moments when Zara found herself questioning whether the constant exposure, the endless interviews, and the public scrutiny were worth the sacrifices she was making in her personal life. She had once been a quiet woman who cherished her privacy, her time with loved ones, and the peaceful moments of solitude that kept her grounded. But now, it felt as though the world was always watching. She couldn't walk down the street without someone recognizing her or asking for a picture. Even moments of peace had become fleeting. Despite the challenges, Zara continued to press on, determined to make a difference. Her efforts began to catch the attention of world leaders, and invitations to speak at international summits and forums started pouring in. In many ways, Zara felt like she was walking a tightrope. She was standing up for something much bigger than herself, yet the pressure to continue leading the charge for equality weighed heavily on her shoulders. One day, Zara received an invitation to speak at a global summit on social justice and inequality, hosted by one of the largest organizations dedicated to human rights. It was an opportunity to have her voice heard on a grand scale, to speak to a room full of influential leaders from around the world about the importance of tackling systemic racism and injustice. Zara felt a surge of excitement and apprehension. This could be the moment that truly propelled her message into global consciousness. But as the date of the summit approached, a familiar feeling of uncertainty began to creep in. Zara had been invited to address a room full of politicians, business magnates, and celebrities, all of whom claimed to be passionate about the causes she had championed. But she had learned that words alone were often meaningless without action. And as she reviewed the roster of attendees, she couldn't help but wonder, would they be receptive to her message, or would they simply nod politely and go back to their comfortable lives, untouched by the realities she was speaking about? The night before the summit, Zara sat alone in her hotel room, reflecting on her journey. She thought about her grandmother's words, which had always been a guiding light for her: true change is not about talking, it's about doing. Zara had always kept those words close to her heart, and now, more than ever, they seemed to ring true. She didn't just want to speak to the crowd, she wanted to inspire them to act, to challenge the systems they were a part of, to take responsibility for creating a better world. When Zara took the stage the next morning, the room fell silent. For the first time in a long while, she felt the weight of the moment. She was standing in front of some of the most powerful people in the world, but her thoughts were on the people who would never get the chance to stand in front of a microphone, who would never have a room full of decision-makers listening to their stories. Her heart was with them, the everyday people, the Leahs, the young women and men who struggled to be seen, heard, and valued. "Good morning," Zara began, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "I stand before you today not as a representative of any one group, but as a representative of all those who have been pushed to the margins. Those who are overlooked, who are ignored, and who are told they do not matter. I stand here as a person who has lived that experience, who has fought through it, and who is now working every day to ensure that no one else has to face it alone." She paused, her gaze sweeping over the room, looking at the faces of those who had the power to change policies, shape industries, and impact lives. "I'm not here to tell you what you already know," she continued. "I'm not here to lecture you on what it means to have privilege or to live without it. What I'm here to do is to remind you of something that we so often forget, that our success is tied to the success of others. That true equality is not a favor, it is a fundamental human right. And if we do not stand up for those who are silenced, we will never create a world where everyone has the opportunity to thrive." Her words seemed to hang in the air, heavy with meaning. Zara wasn't interested in being polite, in saying the things people wanted to hear. She wanted to challenge them, to make them uncomfortable, to force them to confront their own complicity in the systems that allowed inequality to persist. But it wasn't all criticism. Zara also spoke of the progress that had been made, the scholarships awarded, the businesses that were now prioritizing diversity, the partnerships that were beginning to take shape. She spoke about the power of collective action, about how small steps had turned into big strides. "As much as we have accomplished, we have only scratched the surface," Zara said. "We still live in a world where people are discriminated against for the color of their skin, the country they were born in, or the gender they identify with. But we have the power to change that. We have the power to create a world where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. It's not an impossible dream, it's a reality we can build if we are willing to act." The room erupted into applause. Some stood, others clapped fervently, and Zara could see the looks of determination in the eyes of many. She had done it. She had spoken not just to their intellects, but to their hearts. She had made them see the humanity in the cause. But as Zara left the stage that day, she knew that her work was far from finished. The applause was only a brief moment of validation in the long fight ahead. She knew that the real change would not come from one speech, one summit, or even one movement. It would come from the people, from the collective effort of millions of voices raised in unison, demanding justice and equality for all. And so, Zara continued to fight, not for recognition, but for the future she knew was possible. Every person she inspired, every barrier she broke, and every conversation she sparked brought the world one step closer to that better future. Zara was no longer just a symbol. She was a catalyst for change, and the movement she had started was only just beginning. The road ahead would be long, but Zara was no longer afraid. She had seen what was possible when people stood together. And with every challenge, every setback, and every victory, she was more determined than ever to see that dream become a reality. The power of unity and unexpected allies. As Zara continued to speak at summits, hold workshops, and collaborate with organizations, the movement she had begun took on a life of its own. What had started as an individual's fight against injustice had turned into a collective force for change, as people across the globe began to join her cause. But Zara knew that no matter how strong the movement grew, it would only be sustainable if it was built on the foundation of true unity not just between allies, but across diverse groups of people, each bringing their unique experiences and perspectives to the table. One afternoon, as Zara prepared for another speaking engagement, she received an unexpected message, a letter from an influential, conservative political figure. The letter, at first glance, seemed an unlikely one for someone like Zara to receive. Politicians like him were often at odds with the ideals Zara championed, focused on policies that didn't always prioritize equality or inclusivity. The letter was brief but direct, and its contents took her by surprise. Dear Ms. Zara, I've been following your work for some time now, and I want to express my admiration for the message you're spreading. While I have long held different views on certain issues, I've been forced to confront my own biases and preconceived notions after reading about your personal story and hearing you speak. I would like to offer my support for your upcoming initiatives, and hope we can find a way to work together for the betterment of our communities. Best regards, Senator Jonathan Avery. Zara stared at the letter in disbelief. The senator, known for his conservative stance on many issues, was someone who had been on the opposite side of most conversations about race and social justice. Yet here he was, acknowledging the importance of the movement and offering his support. At first, Zara wasn't sure what to make of it. Was this a political maneuver? Or was it genuine? Could someone with such a starkly different viewpoint really have had a change of heart? Zara knew that while change often came from unlikely places, it wasn't always easy to tell when someone was truly ready to act in good faith. However, in the spirit of building unity and creating lasting change, Zara decided to meet with the senator. She believed that true transformation required openness, even if it meant having difficult conversations. If someone was willing to listen, then she was willing to engage. A few days later, they sat across from one another in a conference room at a local community center, surrounded by staff members and advisors. Senator Avery, dressed in a sharp suit, appeared more approachable than Zara had imagined. His eyes were sincere as he spoke. Ms. Zara, he began, I'll be honest with you. I've spent much of my career focusing on policies that I believed were in the best interest of the country, but over the years, I've come to realize that my approach was limited. It was one-dimensional. I didn't understand how the system of privilege and oppression affected people in ways I couldn't see from my position. Your work and your words made me take a long, hard look at myself, at the policies I've supported, and at the way I've been blind to the experiences of others. I want to help change that. I want to find ways to do better. Zara was quiet for a moment, processing his words. She had encountered many people who claimed to want to make a difference, but it was rare to hear someone admit that they had been wrong, especially someone as established in their career as Senator Avery. I appreciate your honesty, Senator, Zara said, her voice measured. It takes courage to acknowledge that our past actions may not have been the right ones. But words alone aren't enough. If you truly want to support this movement, you need to commit to real change, not just in your rhetoric, but in the policies you champion. You have the power to affect legislation, to make changes that will impact people's lives on a much larger scale. I'm willing to work with you, but we must ensure that our actions align with our words. Senator Avery nodded in agreement. I'm ready to put in the work. I may not have all the answers yet, but I'm committed to learning and evolving. And I'd like to help drive change, not just in my state but across the nation. Zara felt a shift in the room. While it was impossible to know if the senator's intentions were purely altruistic, she understood that his support, if genuine, could bring immense power to the movement. As a policymaker, he had the ability to influence legislation that could directly impact racial inequality, education, and employment opportunities. But Zara also knew that the true test would come when it was time to act, when tough decisions had to be made. The meeting ended with a handshake, an agreement to continue the conversation, and an understanding that, while their paths had once diverged, they now shared a common goal: to build a more equitable society. Part 8: The Crossroads of Change. Months passed, and Zara's collaboration with Senator Avery began to gain momentum. Their efforts were met with mixed reactions. On one hand, many within the movement praised Zara for opening a door to dialogue with powerful figures who had long resisted change. On the other hand, some in her community questioned her decision to work with someone who had not always been an ally. It was a complex situation, one that required balancing the need for progress with the desire to maintain integrity. Zara didn't have all the answers, but she knew that if real change was going to happen, it had to come from many different directions. It wasn't enough to speak to the choir. It was about reaching across divides, bringing people together to work toward a common future. And sometimes, that meant working with those who didn't yet fully understand the problem but were willing to learn. Together, they launched several initiatives aimed at addressing systemic inequality, from improving access to education for marginalized communities to advocating for fair wages and labor rights. While not every policy they supported passed, the conversations they started reverberated through government halls, media outlets, and corporate boardrooms. The walls that had once seemed insurmountable now felt more porous. Zara also continued her grassroots work, meeting with community leaders, activists, and young people who were at the forefront of the fight for equality. She made sure that her work remained focused on those who needed it most, ensuring that her platform was used to amplify the voices of the unheard. But Zara had learned a hard truth: real change wasn't always linear. It didn't come in tidy packages or with clear milestones. Sometimes, the road to justice was messy, filled with setbacks, disagreements, and difficult compromises. And yet, despite all the challenges, Zara remained steadfast in her mission. She understood now that the work was never truly finished, it was a continuous journey. As she stood on the stage at another rally, speaking to a crowd of thousands, Zara realized that the movement was bigger than her. It was bigger than any one person, any one leader, any one moment. The power of change lay in the collective strength of all those who had been fighting for years, sometimes in silence, sometimes in the shadows. "I may have started this fight," Zara said to the crowd, "but I don't own it. It belongs to all of us, the ones who have been overlooked, the ones who have fought for what's right, and the ones who will continue to push forward, no matter the obstacles. Together, we are the change we seek. And together, we will build the world we deserve." The crowd erupted in applause, and Zara, for the first time in a long while, felt truly at peace. She had always known that change was a long road. But now, more than ever, she was certain that the journey was worth it.